Ms. Edwards, we're live.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is our pleasure to have you with us, share space with us this afternoon as we explore policy under pressure, navigating crises with creativity and resilience in education. The Jamaica Association of Education Officers is proud to mobilize this dialogue, certainly as citizens of the world, and especially for us here in the Caribbean and more locally Jamaica. We know that we're not new to crises. In fact, wherever you are in the world, it seems to be an almost natural, ever-occurring thing. So from one kind of crisis to the next, we're always fixing, we're always adapting, we're always treating with, we're always trying to find solutions on how we can recover and plan better for the next one. And so this afternoon, I thank you for sharing space with us. And of course, we will, with your help, have an engaging dialogue on our theme. Now, for this session today, we are utilizing the YouTube and Facebook pages of the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information to live stream this session. We also have participants joining us on our Zoom platform for this dialogue. So, regardless of the platform that you're on, welcome. Now, today's session will examine the education system's capacity to sustain learning continuity during emergencies and external shocks, including hurricanes, public health crises, and other disruptions that affect teaching and learning. This session aims to foster meaningful dialogue among national, regional, and international experts on practical and innovative strategies to strengthen resilience in the education sector. More specifically, we'll be focusing on policy responsiveness during crises. We'll be looking at curriculum adaptation and continuity planning. We'll explore infrastructure readiness and disaster preparedness. And we have to take care of ourselves in the midst and all those whom we serve. So psychosocial support systems for students as well as staff. And we'll be exploring technology integration and innovative learning solutions. Now, this is a 2-hour dialogue, and we invite you to sit back, relax, engage with us in the chat on the different platforms that we're using today. And of course, feel free to share the access points that you're using with a friend, with a neighbor, with a colleague, so they too can benefit from this engagement. It is at this time I will invite President of the Jamaica Association of Education Officers, Dr. Euphemia Burke Robinson, to bring us her greeting and the official welcome.
Thank you so very much, Member Edwards. Our moderators, distinguished panelists, the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information, heads of units, heads of departments, regional directors, educational leaders, executive of the Jamaica Association of Education Officers, our chair for the Research and Evaluations Committee, along with the hard-working members who have engineered this session, colleagues, stakeholders, members of the Jamaica Association of Education Officers, our viewers who have joined us on the different platforms across the region and beyond. I greet you. On behalf of the Jamaica Association of Education Officers, it is my distinct honor and privilege as president of the association to welcome you to this timely and highly significant webinar under the theme, Policy Under Pressure, Navigating Crises with Creativity, Resilience in Education. Let me say thanks to our permanent secretary for partnering with us as we host this session. We gather at this time when educational systems across the world continue to grapple with uncertainty, disruptions, and rapid change. Hurricanes, public health crises, violence, economic instability, and technological shift have all reminded us that education cannot merely exist in moments of stability. It must also remain strong in seasons of pressure. The true test of an education system is not only how it functions in calm waters, but how it responds in storms. Today's webinar, therefore, seeks to move beyond conversations into critical reflection, practical insights, and transformative thinking as we examine how policy, leadership, creativity, and resilience can work together to sustain continuity of learning and to protect the well-being of our students and educators. We are indeed honored to have with us an outstanding cadre of local, regional, and international experts whose collective experiences and perspectives will enrich our dialogue. And certainly, you'll hear more about them. We thank you for partnering with us as thought leaders this very engaging and important activity. Our participants, principals, teachers, education officers, policymakers, students, and stakeholders joining us today. Your presence signals a shared commitment to strengthening the resilience and sustainability of education throughout Jamaica and the wider Caribbean region. As educators, we understand that crises do not only interrupt buildings and timetables, they interrupt dreams, emotional well-being, access, equity, opportunity, and so much more. Yet history has repeatedly shown that some of the greatest innovations ever emerged in moments of greatest pressure. So today, I encourage us not just to merely ask, how do we survive crisis, but rather, how do we lead courageously throughout them? And so, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you again for joining us. Welcome to the Jamaica Association of Education's Officer Education Webinar 2026. Let the dialogue begin. I yield to you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you so much, President Robinson, for that welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, you would have heard our president speak to the fact that we have an expert panel with us this afternoon. We have with us persons representing the local space, representing the Caribbean region, representing internationally. And at this time, I will introduce them to you. We have a panel of 5 persons who will be sharing with us in this session today. We have Dr. Leo Gilling, and Dr. Gilling is a multidisciplinary academic practitioner whose work bridges education, criminology, public policy, and diaspora development. Holding a PhD in criminology and criminal justice, he is driven by a central idea that human behavior is shaped by the systems we design, and that meaningful change requires those systems to be intentionally rethought. He serves as vice chair of the National Ethnocultural Advisory Council and executive chairman of the Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network, JDTAN, where he leads initiatives connecting education, philanthropy, and cross-border collaboration in support of Jamaica's development. Dr. Gilling is also the founder of the Caribbean Institute of Criminology and Criminal Justice, and is actively leading the transformation of Don Robin Christian Academy in Jamaica, implementing data-driven and system-focused reforms in teaching and learning. A researcher, author, and thought leader. His work spans domestic violence, policing, and education as a tool for prevention. Through his writing and frameworks, he continues to advance practical solutions grounded in both scholarship and the lived experiences, ensuring that ideas translate into real-world impact. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Leo Gilling. Additionally, we have with us this afternoon Professor Paloma Mohamed Martin. Professor Martin is a PhD and full professor of behavior and communication at the University of Guyana. She's also an adjunct professor of cultural diplomatics at Trent University. She's currently the 11th Vice Chancellor and first woman to lead the university in its 60-year history. She's also the first woman Vice Chancellor to be appointed in the Anglophone Caribbean. Before becoming Vice Chancellor, Professor Mohamed led the University of Guyana's Transformational Management Committee as its second chair from August 2019. She has been Deputy Vice Chancellor, Philanthropy, Alumni, and Civic Engagement, known as PACE, a department which she founded and built over the last 4 years. Professor Mohamed returned to Guyana in 2007 to help resuscitate the failing Center for Communication Studies, and despite her extensive international footprint, has remained with the University of Guyana, becoming Director of the Center for Communication Studies, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, and Deputy Vice Chancellor. In committing to the university becoming a top-ranking institution, she has functioned as a world-class academic, researcher, beloved and inspirational teacher, as well as a dedicated and courageous servant leader. Please note, as an academic, Professor Mohamed has studied at the University of Guyana, the University of the West Indies, Harvard University, and CAM in Canada. Her area of focus is on strategy and change, as she is a specialist in human behavior and human communications. Paloma Mohamed was awarded a Presidential Medal of Service in 2012 and the City of New York Award for Culture in 2013. She became the first woman Caribbean Laureate of Excellence in Arts and Letters in 2015 and was again recognized with the National Arrow of Achievement in May 2015. In 2014, she was named one of Guyana's top 5 most influential women. The short period of her tenure at the University of Guyana has seen rapid changes, most significantly from being a fully face-to-face university to becoming a blended one, regaining accreditation and registration in some areas, and rising in world ranking 200 places, being named number 5 in the world for places to study climate and the environment. Growing enrollment numbers, increasing the number of pedigreed faculty while balancing the budget and boosting policy and research capacity 300-fold with the addition of 4 research institutes, namely energy, green economics, resilience, and strategic security, as well as food and nutrition security, headed by funded research chairs. Professor Paloma Mohamed Martin has become a sought-after futurist thinker, adding to the growing conversation on the future of higher education, work, and humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, I now introduce to us our third panelist, Mr. Davion Leslie. Mr. Leslie is a professional with more than 2 decades of multidimensional experience at various levels and in different areas of the education system. Since November 1, 2023, he has served as the Program Manager for Human Resource Development at the CARICOM Secretariat based in Guyana. In this role, he is responsible for developing, coordinating and harmonizing educational policies across the CARICOM region in order to unlock Caribbean human potential. Previously, from 2008 to 2023, Mr. Leslie served at the Ministry of Education, Jamaica, helping to shape the country's teacher development and curriculum delivery landscape. In addition, he has more than 15 years' experience as an educator at the secondary and tertiary levels, where he taught mathematics, research methods, and various teacher education courses. He considers himself an eternal optimist, a professional procrastinator, and a coffeeholic who lives by the motto, "Stir responds to duty's call." Please allow me, moderator's privilege, to also indicate that Mr. Davion Leslie is also a past president of the Jamaica Association of Education Officers. Our fourth panelist this afternoon, colleagues, is Mr. Killen Otieno. Mr. Otieno is a seasoned humanitarian leader with over 20 years' experience delivering high-impact responses across Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, Europe, and in the global context. His expertise spans emergency response, resilience building, livelihoods, food security, and complex humanitarian coordination, with a strong track record of leveraging both local and corporate resources for anticipatory action, rapid response, and long-term recovery. Before serving the Caribbean through Pinnacle Impact International, Killen led and supported humanitarian operations in some of the world's most challenging contexts, and I will share some of them with us so that we understand the level of expertise that he presents here. In Gaza, 2005 to present, leading the emergency response from Egypt with Plan International, coordinating life-saving aid, protection, and resilience programs for displaced populations. In Mozambique, 2019, strengthened early warning systems, pre-positioned logistics, and supported livelihoods, recovery for millions. In Kenya, 2011, Drought and Kenyans for Kenya campaign partnered with a number of entities, including Kenya Red Cross, to reach 3.7 million people. Horn of Africa Drought Response coordinated anticipatory action and pre-positioning supplies across Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya. In Haiti, 2010 earthquake supported rapid mobile network restoration, emergency alerts, and $5 million in aid for 1.5 million displaced citizens. In Niger, emergency nutrition response managed supply chains for therapeutic foods and mobile clinics addressing acute malnutrition. Through Killen's career, he has combined technical expertise in livelihoods, resilience, and food security with strategic leadership, governance, and operational excellence. He has served in senior leadership roles, including Global Operations Officer for Africa, Country Director of South Sudan, Global Head of Food Security at Plan International, and Regional Emergency Response Advisor with the Norwegian Refugee Council. Killen Otieno holds a Master of Business Administration in Operations and Project Management. He is a certified project management professional and is currently pursuing a PhD. He is fluent in English with a working knowledge of French and thrives in high-pressure, complex humanitarian environments. And you can imagine from his body of work, just that synopsis that has been shared, he really has to be able to navigate complex spaces. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, our fifth panelist is Dr. Steve Lawrence. He is a transformational education leader, researcher, and technology strategist with over 30 years experience across technical vocational education and training, government, academia, and industry. He currently serves as director in the local TVET space, where he leads multi-campus initiatives focused on workforce readiness, innovation, and inclusive skills development. His work centers on the integration of artificial intelligence, digital learning systems, and competency-based education to strengthen alignment between training and emerging labor market demands. Dr. Lawrence is widely recognized for advancing digital TVET ecosystems and applied research that improves training delivery, institutional performance, and workforce productivity. A published researcher and regional thought leader, he has contributed to policy and innovation dialogues across Jamaica and the wider Caribbean, with engagements in Canada and Bermuda. He is also a founding partner in the Everbrook Brain Institute and Cognitive Clinic, EBICC, where his work explores the intersection of technology, neuroscience, and human development. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just introduced us to our 5 expert panelists who will be sharing with us this afternoon. Now, as we transition into the dialogue, phase 1 of the dialogue this afternoon will be centered around public policy and governance, looking specifically at how policy frameworks hold up under pressure and what institutional changes may or may not be needed. We will also, in this section, look at curriculum adaptation, examining not just curriculum delivery, but the substance, sequencing, and purpose of what we teach when the ground shifts. For our panelists, welcome. Thank you for being with us. And we will begin our discussion this afternoon by first looking at what caused us to get here in the first place. Coming out of our experiences here in Jamaica over the past 2 years, we had first Hurricane Beryl, which brought some devastation, and we thought that would be the worst of it. But then last year, we saw Hurricane Melissa. When Hurricane Melissa struck, many systems were tested in real time. And so it brought us all to a space where, as educators, as professionals, as citizens of this world, as citizens of Jamaica, we had to start thinking about what does that stress test really reveal about the underlying architecture of our education governance, and where the design would have failed us most critically, if it ever did. And so I want to open the dialogue here just to hear initial thoughts from each of our panelists around our theme and that critical point. What does that stress test reveal about the underlying architecture of our education governance, and where did the design fail us most critically? Our theme may remind us, ladies and gentlemen, policy under pressure, navigating crises with creativity and resilience in education. I will start the dialogue with Dr. Gilling.
Thank you, goodly lady. I appreciate the opportunity. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, JAEO, for allowing me to be a part of this discussion today. When I looked at the theme, I did 2 things. One, I came up with a question. The question that I came up with was, when pressure rises, do our decisions improve or collapse? And the second thing I thought about was, well, it didn't take me long to think about a popular Jamaican saying, pressure bust pipe. We use it casually, but it's actually very, very instructive. When water pressure gets too high, pipes burst. Sometimes you're driving down the street and You see water shooting up in the air, and you say, man, what the water, what happened, man, what happened? But we don't always see it in infrastructure. We see it in people. Some people end up with a stroke or with a heart attack. And when we trace it back, there were signs long before the crisis occurred. We see it in schools too. Fights break out, and we ask the question, how come so much fight that broke out in all of the school them across the island? And again, we say, pressure bust pipe. But the question we really ask is, did it really happen suddenly? Or were there signals before? Because pressure doesn't just appear, it builds. And more importantly, it signals. In schools, those signals are there every day. Small conflicts, shifts in behavior, breakdown in communication, teacher frustration, parent raising concerns. Nothing major individually, but together they tell a story. And the real issue is not whether the signals exist, it's whether we respond to them or we normalize them. Because when we normalize pressure, it doesn't disappear, it accumulates. Every school eventually experiences what I call the pressure moment or the pressure point. Something shifts, expectation rises, time gets tight. Suddenly, margin of error becomes very small. Communication starts becoming strained. Students escalate. Parents and sometimes the media become involved. Leadership is trying to stabilize everything in real time. And what that moment really reveals is not just the issue itself, but the system underneath it. How decisions were made, how communication flowed, whether the structure can actually hold under pressure. Because policy is not simply what is written on a document. Policy is what guides decisions when pressure rises. And when pressure rises, systems don't automatically improve. They reveal what they are built to do. Some systems absorb pressure well. Roles are clear, communication stays aligned, and even under strain, the structure holds up. Other systems begin to fragment. Decisions become inconsistent. Communications break down, and leadership starts chasing situations instead of managing it. But that difference rarely begins during crisis. It was there long before. Resilient systems are usually designed intentionally through preparation, clarity, communication, and willingness to adapt before situations escalate. Preparations cannot be something we turn to only when pressure rises. It has to become a part of how the system operates every day, because response is not accidental. Response is intentional, coordinated, and practiced communication and action. And on the other hand, reaction matters because reaction is often emotional or habitual. The things we normally do when conditions are calm. But pressure exposes whether those habits were actually built for difficult moments. And sometimes creativity in leadership is not inventing something new during crisis, but adjusting early enough to prevent the system from becoming overwhelmed. And this is where I think we must be honest with ourselves in education. We are not short of data. We assess, we collect, we identify problems early, but too often we delay acting on what we already know. And that gap between what we know and what we are willing to act on consistently is often where the systems begin to fail. For
Sir
me,
Gilling,
yes.
you have given us quite a bit there to chew on in
All right.
terms of, your initial thoughts here. Please permit me to get the initial feedback from all our panelists, and then certainly we're going to share with us a fireside chat, which is a discussion coming out of some of our schools, looking at their experiences. So we'll be looking at two of our schools in Western Jamaica, looking specifically at their experiences pre hurricane as well as post. And of course, just looking at how they're pivoting, and some of what you're raising there, I take it should be coming out of the discussions as we continue. So panelists, I will just take your initial thoughts for a minute, and then we will go over to the fireside chat. We'll turn now to Professor Mohamed Martin.
Hello?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, good afternoon. So I am very grateful to be here, and I'm privileged to be involved in this conversation. I was actually in Montego Bay when Melissa hit, and so I can completely commiserate with you all, and also to also congratulate the country and how resilient and how exceptionally wonderful the people who looked after me when I was there were, even though they were facing their own problems. So the question of whether policy failed or not, to me, is not what I'd like to focus on. I don't know that anything could have prepared us or can prepare us significantly for these kind of extreme and catastrophic climate events. Certainly not in the sense that we have inherited. Our systems of education have been inherited from a very, I think, distant colonial past for many of us, created and adapted, maybe not even adapted, maybe transplanted completely into our countries, without us having an opportunity to really interrogate what the local context in terms of environment, in terms of capacity, in terms of cultures, and certainly in terms of our resources available. So I think these kinds of conversations that we're having today are important, and they're happening at a very significant time, because all of those conversations become important and imperative, not only in the context of our history, but also in the context of our future. So one of the things that I've been advocating for, I don't know if anybody's taking me on, but I'll say it until I'm blue in the face. And that is, we have to be able to equip our government entities and our regional institutions with an ability to have absolute foresighting abilities. So I call it a futures office, or a futures officer, if you don't have the funding to do it or the resources. But somebody who's looking at what the science is saying, not only about climate, about education, about the integration of technologies that we don't manage and control or own yet, into the education systems, how that's likely to affect us, and how we're going to be able to function in a world that's rapidly evolving. So we're talking about looking at what I like to call hyper disruptive contexts in which we live. And it's not only hurricanes. We had for instance, in St. Vincent, we had a volcano a couple of years ago, right? That also touched Barbados and other islands. And in my country, Guyana, where we don't get hurricanes and earthquakes, we get the tail end. But right now, we're having flooding because we're on the sea level, right? Part of the coast is on the sea level. So how are we able to plan and predict these kinds of events based on the science that's in the world? And how do we strategize to ensure that we can avoid them or mitigate extreme impacts of these things when they happen? That's, to me, the question that I would like to address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Martin. Dr. Lawrence, I invite you to share your initial thoughts.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Standing on all protocols established. I'd like to also support my colleagues that have gone initially in saying that rigid policy framework does not necessarily mean inflexible. Sometimes we see the strength as being how rigid can we make it? And this might actually speak to our colonial past, where rigidity is considered to be strong, but rigid is difficult to scale. It's very inflexible. It's very inflexible. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
And it does not allow for the changing realities. So, for example, you might have a situation where physical access disappears. Then once that happens, timetables become unrealistic. The traditional delivery models collapse. The assessment systems and, just all that becomes just very impractical. So we're at a space now when we recognize that regardless of whether your reality is threatened by earthquakes or by hurricanes or by flooding or any kind of outage or disruption, we now need to ensure that our policies are updated in such a way that it allows for adaptive implementation, it allows for decentralized decision making, it allows for empowered institutions to be able to innovate if they are siloed or cut off. And it has to be a case where we prioritize continuity over bureaucracy. And bureaucracy is a flashpoint word where people don't like hearing it, but it is a part of our reality in our small nation states. We love rigidity, we love bureaucracy, but the truth is, at the end of the day, we need to now think about how do we get the competency ready? How do we get it in place? How do we prioritize that simplify delivery pathways? How do we maintain learner engagement despite instability? And that has to be answered by blended delivery, modular learning, asynchronous instruction, micro-credentialing, project-based assessment, and competency-based progression. So if we start with those things up front as we craft policy or reform policy, what it means is our response in the face of disruption is going to be one of competence and continuity instead of just being reactive. We will have it as a part of our SOPs. We'll have it as a part of our system where we were ready from the get-go. So it's just a matter of continuing with what we have always done. And that is something that is heavily at the foot of policy and how we craft it and how we make it flexible.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lawrence. I invite Mr. Leslie to share his thoughts.
Thank you so much, Julia. And let me say good afternoon to all the other panelists. I always seem to be on these panels with Professor Mohamed Martin. And it appears as well, Dr. Lawrence, that you and I are cursed or blessed to always be on these panels together as well. I certainly would want to attach myself to the sentiments that were shared, especially by the remarks that Professor Martin made towards the end with respect to the importance of foresighting. That's one of the thoughts that I had coming into this discussion, that foresighting is therefore not, given everything that's been happening in education, not a luxury in policy planning. It is really at this point one of the governance necessities that we have to begin to consider. How do we make that front and center? How do we empower the system to detect emerging risk and to do scenario planning? And to what extent are our legislative procedures built around foresighting? And do we even have a legislative mind frame, a mindset that allows for foresighting to be a part of how legislations are created? And in this particular discussion, legislations might be important as a consideration because as we talk about resilience, a part of what we have to think about is infrastructure. And if we were to reflect on the current infrastructural activities going on across the region, are we satisfied that we have considered adequately the contextual and climatic realities that we face, even as we forge ahead with new school buildings and so on? I know I don't have much time for opening remarks, but there's perhaps one point in particular that I want to make because I believe it anchors so much my own reflection coming into the meeting. I think coming into this webinar, I think within the region, perhaps the greatest crisis that we face in education may be a crisis of imagination. What a friend of mine, as he and I were speaking the other day, he described it as imagination fatigue. And after years of overlapping crises in the region, systems often become reactive, and we have been trained almost into a reactive mode rather than to be visionary. And we tend to think of responding to crisis through the lens of stabilization, compliance, and those tend to drive short-term recovery, but they never lead to the kind of bold, ambitious, almost outrageous plans that lead to system transformation. I read an article last night, even as I was thinking about this presentation, and it was a reflection that an education policymaker made, a Caribbean education policymaker, on a blog that he keeps on LinkedIn. And he made the point that within the Caribbean region, crisis is not a distant reality. It's something that we lived. One of the dimensions of policy planning that we don't think about is that many of our leaders who are involved in policy planning encounter crisis initially, not as strategists, but as survivors. And some of them even think of themselves as victims. They lived it long before they crafted the first policy. And so the experience that they bring to policy planning is one that is fraught with emotions. It's very often they look at it through the lens of fear, uncertainty, loss, displacement, institutional failure, or even sometimes, as he said in the blog that he made last night, social trauma. So how is it then that we begin to even question our own psyche around responding to crisis? And how do we be intentional and deliberate about taking an opportunity when crises present themselves to reflect, to evaluate, and be intentional about using them as learning moments? Crises often force us in directions we really ought to have found on our own. But when they do, we need to acknowledge that this is a great direction to be going in and embrace it. That for me, I think, as I think about where we go with this conversation, is one of the points that I believe I will keep coming back to as I share with the panelists this afternoon. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leslie. So I'm hearing a whole bunch of things coming out, a number of themes coming out from the conversation so far. But before we delve a little deeper into that, we want to hear from Mr. Otieno, his initial thoughts as we get ready to view the fireside chat and advance the conversation.
Thank you. I don't know where to start. First of all, I just want to say a big thank you to Jamaica Association of Education Officers, JAEO, and on behalf of Pinnacle Impact, I'm glad to be part of this. I'm calling in from Kenya, which is, like about 8 hours away from where you are. And, it's a long distance, but I'm glad that I'm part of this conversation. One of the reasons why I'm very glad to be part of this conversation is because even though I'm calling in from Kenya, and thank you very much, Julia, for a very generous introduction, I'm a global citizen. And I want to offer my opinion and insights based on global citizenry. and global citizenry that is also connected to the fact that I've worked in humanitarian and development sectors, and mostly in what we call education in emergencies. So thank you again. I want to be very honest that, when I looked at the theme and I looked at myself and the people who are in this, I was not very sure that I fit the bill, but I think I appreciate the fact that even though I'm not a bureaucrat, I have something to offer around education in emergencies and my experience around what works, what doesn't work. And it comes from seeing what works when schools are destroyed, when children are displaced, when teachers are displaced, when children are traumatized, and when learning is suddenly interrupted. So when I looked at this theme today, I asked myself, how am I going to contribute in a meaningful manner? Because I recognize that we also must make sure that we manage your time very well. I looked at policy under pressure. And you are practitioners in education who have also gone through experiences that have put your policies under pressure. And I asked myself, how do I contribute to this question of navigating crisis with creativity and resilience in education? Forgive me because my diction and my English might be very different from yours, but I'll try to be very clear. So I asked myself, how can we contribute? And I said, what I bring to this discussion today must be very uncomfortable because it has to move us from comfort zone, not to the danger zone, but to the learning zone. Why am I interested? Because last year I was involved in the conversations with Jamaica, with your teams around what happened with Melissa. And I asked myself, what we often call as an education crisis, when disaster strikes, is really about school crisis. It is not about school crisis. It is about system. We must be putting ourselves in that uncomfortable space where we say we have gone through multiple fragilities, disasters, but the system keeps failing. Why does the system keep failing when we know that we have gone through the same types of fragilities and crises that disrupt education? So when these failures happen, and what we're talking about here is openness, and I think I like to call it what it is. We must call it what it is, isn't it? When these failures happen, when the system, when the policies is stretched, when it is tested to the limits, it's always because we have not learned lessons. We have lessons not learned. And I want us to be very honest with ourselves to say, look, should we go back and look at the lessons not learned so we can unlearn some things to learn new things? And that's, for me, the way I approach it. Across my experiences, I've seen lessons. I've come to see that children will not stop learning because of crisis. They will stop learning because systems are too slow to respond to the needs based on the disasters and the crises that we know. And therefore, we need to ask ourselves which part of these systems and policies that need to shift. Because if they shift, then we, as the practitioners and the holders of the duty bearers, basically, then we will be doing justice to these children. Today, I would like that we speak about, first, policy under pressure. What is policy under pressure? 2, creativity under pressure. How do we become creative so that we can shift with times during pressure, under pressure? Thirdly, what is resilience going to look like in Jamaica for the association based on what we know? And finally, what the future must look like. I would like to stop there, but I would like to address things. 1, policy under pressure. What does it mean? How does it affect children? How can we shift? 2, I would like to address the issue of creativity under pressure. What does it look like? What does it address? And what must we do? How do we shift? 3, I would like to talk about resilience under pressure. What does it mean based on our contexts, based on what we know? And how can we move the needle so that we can be alive and current with times based on the need for us to be able to shift, knowing very well that the kids depend on our creativity, resilience to secure and assure the future. Number 4, I will, if I get a time today, speak about a subject that I'm very passionate about, and this is anticipatory action. How do we embed anticipatory action in education?
I think we can take
Knowing
that
very well
point at when we go to the next section where we're looking at the way forward.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Otieno. Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite you to turn your attention to the fireside chat. And this video production was managed by a team of officers as part of the Research and Evaluation Committee of the Jamaica Association of Education Officers to really capture the experiences of schools. And we're just going to share with you briefly the experiences of 2 schools. This is specifically looking at leadership experiences during crisis, decision-making under pressure, and key lessons and reflections. And some of those broad themes you would have also mentioned in your opening remarks. We turn our attention to the video.
Is it supposed to have sound?
Yes, there is a sound.
Well, I'm not hearing it. I'm not sure if others are.
Disrupted lives, fractured
Okay, could you
routines.
please restart the video? We weren't
Policy
hearing the
under
sound.
pressure. Navigating crises with creativity and resilience in education.
When Hurricane Melissa swept across our communities, it did more than damage buildings. It disrupted lives, fractured routines, and tested the very foundation of our education system. Classrooms were silenced, resources were lost, and for many, the path forward was uncertain.
Yet in the midst of devastation, something remarkable emerged. Across schools hardest hit, educators, leaders, and communities rose, not just to recover, but to reimagine.
Because of the damage, the canteen had to be relocated. We had to borrow one of the labs from our home department, and so that lab was now converted to the canteen. The undercraft near the canteen was the area that you buy your snacks and you would purchase your meals. We would have to use some offices were turned into classrooms. Even my office was a classroom.
A lot of the repairs, doors that were beaten by Melissa, were reinstalled. We went upstairs, took down some of the doors, came down here, installed them. The students did all that. So the different departments did their own.
Yeah. So because of that experience in COVID, it was easy for us to traverse this troublesome time as we implemented the emergency backup plan, which is to utilize the digital place where all students had Google Classroom, all SVAs were in Google Classroom, students had all the lesson notes already. And also, because of that too, we already had implemented the use of simulation softwares. Good. So we were still able to navigate even though our machines were damaged, technically wiped out. But we were still able to navigate by using simulation tools, which is digital tools.
Right. No, the strategies that we employed was trying to get back our exam students in as early as possible. Yeah. So as soon as we started the cleanup, yes, and we had enough space, we got our upper school students and we had them here back at school, getting them ready for their examination. Right. Another strategy that we employed was that as soon as electricity was restored, we prepared packages for our students, for our lower school students who we could not invite in at the time.
One of the procedures that our school did, we started back school really fast. So coming back and being able to do that, it gave me a sense of hope. It made me feel really good.
I would say what gives me hope when I look to the future is the evidence that we can. So being through what we have been through and still pushing, still having that resilience and being where we are now, that really shows me that whatever comes my way, with God, with unity, with community, I can do this, I can get beyond this point.
They adapted, they improvised, they innovated.
Teaching did not stop, it transformed.
Lessons moved beyond walls. Learning found new spaces, and connection became the most powerful tool of all.
In these moments of crisis, policy was no longer just written, it was lived, tested in real time, shaped by urgency and strengthened through creativity and resilience.
Not just a story of loss. It is a story of leadership under pressure, of systems stretched and redefined, of educators who chose possibility over paralysis.
We can't engage all students on a regular basis every day. So we have to do rotation. So currently we have grade 1 to 3 coming out on a Tuesday and with grade 6 every day, and grade 4 and 5 comes on a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday. Now, when we come, we are either occupying the basic school or we are underneath the tarpaulin or underneath the tent.
Very sad to see the school in this condition. And basically it's just that. I don't feel really good about that.
Okay, I understand. Anybody else? Can tell me? I'm coming.
It is very sad to see that the school we are under tarpaulin and Literally in our school, it was pretty nice. Our class was full of chart and very beautiful. And to see now that Melissa Hurricane came and destroyed our school.
Okay.
So most of what we use are technology. We try to use a lot of technology. So being that we did not suffer much in terms of the internet.
Okay.
We kind of get back the internet quickly.
Okay.
Flow and digital. So we utilize it to teach online and to create stories and worksheets and all of that, so students will be engaged. So no one will be left behind.
Okay.
As we begin this conversation, we invite you to listen, to reflect, and to consider.
How do we design a system that not only withstand disruption, but empower innovation in the face of it?
What does it truly mean to lead, teach, and learn when everything familiar is stripped away? Come to Policy Under Pressure.
Navigating crisis with creativity and resilience in education.
Thank you so much to the team that did this lovely production for us so we could really capture the experiences of our schools. And the two schools featured there, Herbert Morrison Technical High School in Montego Bay and the St. Leonard's Primary School in Westmoreland, two of the most hard-hit parishes coming out of the Hurricane Melissa experience. Now, we know that while our conversation, when we started this conversation as an association, it was primarily, looking at the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa. But we know that, and we have established that today, that crises are always popping up. And, we've always heard that, hey, the only thing that is constant is change, right? We have also heard, based on the initial, points raised by our panelists, ladies and gentlemen, that we can't just wait for things to happen. We have to use the data that we have and to keep planning, keep looking at how we can optimize our systems. Now, when I saw this theme, the first thing that came to mind was something my grandmother would always say: to be forewarned is to be forearmed. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. Now, I'm going to pass the baton to my co-moderator. Today, we have three moderators on. We have Mrs. Karine Reed-Clark, and we have Miss Marcia Higgins. They're also serving as moderators alongside myself, Julia Edwards. At this time, I'm going to invite Mrs. Reed-Clark to take us through our initial readiness pulse check.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is a very good session. I am enjoying the conversation, and we want the persons online to participate in it. And I hope they were listening. There were some excellent points made. The pressure bus pipe one is something that resonated with me, because you don't know if the pipe is working until you really get some pressure to see how well it can manage in a situation like that. But there are some real questions that our panelists would have compiled, and we want to bring you into the conversation. So we have our participants online. We have participants on Zoom. We have participants on our Facebook page. We have participants on our YouTube page, and we want you to be a part of the conversation. But I want you to answer this question for me, and I want you to really think about it. Yes, we had Melissa, we would have had other hurricanes prior. But if another global crisis were to happen tomorrow, what governance weakness are you most worried about? So, I'll repeat it for you, for those of you who didn't hear the first part. If another global crisis were to happen tomorrow, what governance weakness worries you the most? I know what mine is, but I'll tell you after I get some feedback from our participants on Zoom. So I'm asking our moderator to open the chat for those who are able to, and open the microphone for Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris from Marley Primary. He has a point of view as it relates to that. So I hope that someone will allow him to express himself. Okay, someone hands is up. Go ahead and open your microphone. Dr. Stephen Carr, go ahead.
You
Go ahead,
hearing?
Doc.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we are hearing you clearly.
All right. So my major problem is communication.
Yes.
So in the midst of Melissa, there was one region in Jamaica that communication went zilch. And I think that we ought to be proactive and to have some sort of system in place where, in light of that, what do I do as a school? And if I don't remember in COVID, there was a whole network of using corner shop and using auxiliary staff, everybody traveling the community, handing out assignments, picking up assignments. That particular experience we had would be important going forward. If communication fails, what is our next step? What is our next bet? And we found that during Melissa.
Excellent, excellent point. Mr. Harris would have also indicated that he's also concerned about the internet and how we will function in that space. So I'm asking our panelists, anyone want to make a comment as it relates to his concern about communication?
I could speak to my own experience during Melissa. I was in a hotel in Montego Bay, and of course, the power went down, and those of us who people needed to know about us, whether we were alive or what happened, could not communicate. And so this is a very, very significant point you're raising. But what happened is one morning, after about 2 days, I saw everybody from the hotel going in a particular direction, and I decided to follow them. And there was a man driving around with his Starlink, and he was going from place to place, giving a half an hour or so that you could just say, I'm okay, and here's where I am. And I think that's a very significant insight into what kind of redundancy we could have when our own systems terrestrial to our countries go down. You do have possibilities like those. And I really do thank God for that man, whoever he was. I never knew his name, but at least, and he's given us this insight into what happens. In terms of communication, it is also required for coordination. I think this is the big thing that underlies communication: coordination of response, and coordination of community around what it is that what we need to know. So it's I think a fundamental point that has been raised.
Yes.
I see Mr. Leslie's hand up.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Prof, I absolutely agree with you. I think, though, that one of the things that I would want to emphasize, and I say this understanding that I put myself at great peril by having this conversation. But one of the things I want to emphasize is that resilience in education is really not merely technological. And we perhaps need to actively work to decouple those two words from each other, as they seem to now be fused together. In education, resilience needs to go beyond being merely about technology. It's really about relationship and culture. During crisis, technology often receives the most attention. But the truth is, the strongest, most enduring, stabilizing force in education is really human connections. And as educators, we know this to be true. It's about teachers, it's about communities, it's about families, and it's about trusting institutions. During COVID, one things that made technology work in the way that it did is because of the human elements that we attempted to layer over it. To the extent that it didn't work is to the extent that we failed to integrate some of those human elements that are a part of the face-to-face classroom. I think then that it's important that we acknowledge that as we talk about the response and begin to consider and interrogate the response to the lens of technology, it's important that we also include in this conversation a consideration of cultural intelligence, so that our resilience must be more culturally intelligent and not merely technologically advanced. So those two things need not be at odds. Those two things need not be in conflict with each other. But it's important that as we have conversations about how we build resilience into the system, we consider the extent to which we are properly adapting the technology that we are putting into the system to the cultural realities and social and economic realities of the region. And so your experience, Prof, that you shared, I think makes the point very well. I think coming out of COVID, that is one of the resounding points that we were left to contemplate on. That balance between technology and the human element. And how do we ensure that we do not have one overshadowing the other or one cannibalizing the other?
Okay, thank you so much. We have Renee Burrows 7397. She's on our YouTube page. She has two concerns. One, the availability to manage the bills after the aftermath of a major hurricane, a major earthquake, just a major disaster in general. But she's also concerned about the system, the national entities. How are they able to coordinate the type of support that is required in the event of a disaster? Persons are not just worried about their individual situation. They are worried about garbage collection that will reduce diseases. They are worried about transportation units, their transportation as it relates to roadways and so on. They are worried about utilities. So they're asking, yes, we will have this, and I am an individual in this space, but what is the bigger plan? How coordinated are these entities to ensure that we can function probably 2 weeks after a disaster, be up and running? So I'm just gonna pick one of my, Dr. Lawrence, you have your hand up. You could probably make a response to that.
All right, thank you so much. I will make the response, but first I want to touch on Sir Leslie, and we have had this kind of discussion before in another forum. While he's moving to decouple technology from the response, I want to see them together, because from where I have served and where I've spent my time in the scholarship for the last probably 20 years, I've seen that technology serves as one of the best cognitive amplifiers. So even a relationship that he speaks to, the need to be connected to others and all that, this is amplified and made more robust by technology being a part of the framework from the original planning onset. So when you think about, for example, technology is a good way of helping you kind of future-proof your curriculum and your infrastructure. It will help you with the aftermath of the trauma affecting the cognition and the displacement and inequity. Once we work on access, and we heard from one of the stories that was shared in the video that getting back the internet, whether it was by our local provider or through Starlink or some other resilience plan, helped with psychosocial support, helped with flexibility of pacing, helped with differentiated instruction, helped with accessibility to pathways that were already developed in that way. So all of this is really about being very inclusive and being future ready as you craft. Now, in response to what was said earlier, I sit in a very unique space. I have a couple of institutions under my purview. And during COVID, what I found the response to be was that when you were prepared, it was easier to scale and respond. After Melissa, what I found interesting was as a nation, and I can't speak for other nations within the region, but I saw one of the most coordinated and prepared responses. If you looked at from the top level, macro level of, just an insurance policy that made funding available once it broke out of the category of the hurricane that it did. That was brilliant. But even at the granular level, within the parishes, there were contractors with POs in hand that could start clearing the moment the wind died down. I tried to get to one of my most remote locations in Black River. I live in Kingston. I drove from Beverly Hills, heading down to Black River, and JDF was there as deployed, ready to support. China Harbor had contracts in hand, clearing the way. So even though it was normally a 1 hour trip that took me 6 hours, we saw that there was really a lot of planning that went into the readiness, and we still took some lessons from it. And I'm putting this against the backdrop. Remember, we're a small nation state. I was in New Orleans 2 years ago to go on a cruise, and there are places in New Orleans still struggling from Katrina. They still have not been restored. So we have to be mindful of the true data and what really should drive what gives us capacity almost emergently. And the lessons learned are the things that we should take from what has transpired here and really help us become a bit more robust and more prescriptive in how we plan. And this kind of conversation that is attended by not only stakeholders who are operational, but even policy drivers within the space. This is instructive because this decides how we spend the time, how we craft the plans, and how we strategically get ourselves ready to respond to whatever that emergency is. So it really is about demystifying the crisis response and making it a part of our SOPs in a deliberate way so that people actually have a playbook to follow when these eventualities do occur.
Yeah,
Very good. Want to add to that? Go ahead, Mr. Gilling.
Yeah, but I also want to think along the lines of Professor Paloma, because she brought out a critical point about the Starlink that was available. But we've had hurricanes as far back as what my parents remember, 1944, 1951. We have David, we have Maria, we have Andrew, we have all different kinds. We have Beryl and the big one in 1988, Gilbert. And my question is, what have we learned from each of the hurricanes that we have updated our policies with? And are we taking our policies and practicing the points in those? Are we practicing annually, quarterly, biannually? What are we doing with the policies? Are we just pulling them out when the hurricane comes or when the crises break? Are we looking at them any at all? And so it is important for us to use our experience to update our policies, to also make sure that we are communicating clearly. And Professor Paloma says in Montego Bay, were we in a position to have Starlink island-wide before the hurricane so that we don't have to be wondering whether or not we're going to have that communication? And so what are we learning up front when we have a hurricane? What did we learn from Melissa, because we're almost in hurricane season, that we can carry to the next hurricane? And then are we practicing that? Or are we just waiting for the radio to tell us that there's a hurricane coming and we sit and wait and see who's going to die and who's going to be disabled and who's going to make it and who's not going to make it? These are critical things that we need to take into consideration.
Yes. And that is why we have such a good panel today, and we would have opened a discussion to our principals. So this question is very specific This question is really about preparedness and assumption. If a major disruption were to hit your school tomorrow, whether violence, disaster, or a system failure, what exactly would happen in the first 30 minutes? And how confident are you that your staff would respond in a coordinated way rather than individually? So let me repeat it again. If a major disruption were to hit your school tomorrow, whether violence, disaster, or system failure, what exactly would happen in the very first 30 minutes? And how confident are you that your staff would respond in a coordinated way rather than react individually? That's a very good question, Mr. Gilling.
Indeed.
So I'm going to look in our chat and we're going to see, I'm going to select a principal that I see here. Principal of Port Henderson Primary. Principal Bromfield. If you don't mind, Principal Bromfield, raise your hand.
Yes,
okay,
good
go ahead.
afternoon, Miss Reed. Good afternoon, panelists and other colleagues. Very tricky question, Miss Reed, but if it should happen at our school, we have policies in place that the teachers are aware of. We also share these policies with the parents, the security guard, and our support staff, even the lady who sells at the gate. So the first thing that would happen is that the teachers would secure and move with their registers to make sure they can account for each child. We have megaphones and we also have an emergency bell. The emergency bell though is in my office, and hopefully I am in the office, close to the office, then that emergency bell will go off. Members from the security team, the safety and security team, they have the megaphones. Even though our perimeter fence, as you are aware, is very low, and maybe students' first response would to jump the fence, we and the security guards know that we must try as best as possible to keep these students inside and secured. We have our WhatsApp group for teachers, for non-academic staff. So we try to have all these things in place, and we will respond using these measures to ensure that all are kept safe. We also do regular earthquake drills, fire drills. We invite the persons from the fire station, from Waterford, they too come in, assist us with the drills. We have in our classes the emergency numbers on the walls. So I am confident that for the most part, we will be okay at Port Henderson. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I am sure that your staff, they feel confident that, you know, they can respond accordingly. Ms. Horton from Portsmouth Primary, you have your hand up. Go ahead. And after you will ask our final question for this segment, and we will move on to the next aspect of our discussion.
Muted.
Go ahead, Ms. Horton.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Our situation is similar to that of Port Henderson Primary, wherein we have a safety and security policy in place as to how you would respond to different kind of things that might happen. However, also our school is enclosed. So it is enclosed, and so it would be, we have our areas that are earmarked for that we assemble. We have our assembly areas. We have areas earmarked for each grade, and so teachers know what to do in the event of any emergency. However, I am still a little bit concerned because we do our drills and we do very well at our drills. We have done simulation drill, even a tsunami simulation drill with the municipal council. And it was excellent and all of that. But I am still a little concerned as to when the rubber really hits the road, how will persons react? Because while the drills and everything, it is when you're really in the situation that I think I am really concerned about that. How will we respond if there's a real situation? We do not know. But what we do is that we constantly keep practicing, hoping that in the event it happens, we will fall in line. And so at our school, I feel confident that we have given enough practice. When there was an earthquake we had at school, and the response of the children, it was amazing. Our evacuation time was less than 2 minutes. In less than 2 minutes, everybody was out. Also, our parents, we tend to keep communication with them open. So just in case anything happens, we will send out to the different WhatsApp groups and we do our calls. If we'll be able to do that, outside of that, the plan is we keep the children safe until help arrives. That's the best we can do. So we'll keep them on the inside, hoping nobody will start running all over the place. We are happy that we have a fence that keeps everybody in. And yeah, basically we are set. We just hope the human element of fear will not kick in.
Okay. Sounds good, sounds good. The Portmore Disaster Committee, they will be very proud of your responses. I see that you have been ensuring that you're taking notes and the children are ready to respond in the event of a disaster. Thank you so much, principals. So we have one more question for this section. It says, if you had to respond to a major national disaster or crisis tomorrow that would affect the entire education system, how many days would it take to get the learners back to any form of learning? Okay? If you had to respond to a major national disaster or crisis tomorrow that affects the entire education system, how many days would it take to get learners back to any form of learning? So I am gonna open the discussion. I think Mr. Roger Curlew is online. Mr. Curlew, go ahead and unmute. And then there's a hand up and we will get that response. Go ahead, Mr. Curlew. Okay, I am not getting Mr. Curlew, but go ahead, Dr. Lawrence.
Yeah, man. So I'm going to go with lessons learned. I spent like the last 30 years trying to get the whole business of online learning mainstream. And in the early days, I can tell you for like the first 15 years of the journey with me, it was very difficult. About 15 years ago, it became a little more easy because we had a lot of external institutions coming in from overseas offering their content for sale within our marketplace. And then the local institutions kind of took interest in the possibility of income generation by going out to a broader global audience. However, one of the things that struck me, because I was doing some research on that during COVID-19, and I had one institution that I consulted with that they had a board that was very agile. They had a budget that helped with resilience planning. They had decentralization protocols. So even though you have the policies, it allowed you to be able to make intelligent decisions within the policy framework. wherever you found yourself in the cog at the time of the disruption or the emergency. And I remember I landed in Bermuda the night when Bermuda was shut down. One of my institutions, within 8 hours, every learner was fully online, up and running, full business continuity. Our website was redirected to our learning management system. We had single sign-on, so everybody could get on. Teachers, students, even parents could follow up and check in on students. And it was a thing of beauty. But what had preceded that was an entire 2-year period of getting the technology in the hands. So capacity first, getting the technology in the hands of the teachers, ensuring that training, the professional development took place. And it was treated with by the board in a very aggressive and very thoughtful way. I then also had another institution that was also within my purview that the board was not as agile. They had many questions about the kind of upfront investment. And guess what? Up to a year into COVID, we couldn't even get enough computers into the hands of the teachers that needed it. Faculty were struggling because at that time you couldn't source 100 or 200 or 300 laptops or tablets to deploy. Everybody, the US and everybody was holding on to what they had. So we have to realize that really and truly, what we have to do is actually be prepared for a disaster before there's a disaster. It can't be just a knee-jerk response when there's a disaster. People have to be in plan, just as how you have fire drills. We'd have other kind of drills where we are deliberate about, not only just having the continuity planning on paper, because a lot of people have a crisis response on paper, but nobody knows where the full assembly, where the assembly point is. Nobody knows where to find the emergency supplies. There's not a map embedded across the entire physical plant that directs everybody to a safe place. You don't have lighting signs that glow in the dark if lighting goes. Those kind of things are deliberate efforts that have to start way before the disaster. And since we never know when a disaster is coming, it means that we are really, tasked with really getting this going really quickly. Because at the end of the day, what the research shows is that the vulnerable learners that were already vulnerable become more disproportionately disconnected during emergency. So I want us to be board members, policy drivers, principals. Let us now start. I remember last year I keynoted at an event, and when I asked the executives and the board members within the space, how many of your boards have a budget set aside for emergency response? I think a full room only had 2 people who had a deliberate budget crafted in that way. So we have to we cannot have the country having a better response rate than us at the granular level that has span control over institutions. Let us get with the whole planning and ensuring, that we protect our institutions and our learners in that way. Capacity first.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lawrence. There was a discussion some time ago, immediately after Melissa, and I'm just gonna throw it out there and then I move on to our moderator. At the end of a disaster, do we really want to go back into school? Or should we be very concerned about just the home, just the connections, just the connecting, just the general well-being of the persons? Do we rush into the education system trying to ensure that we're up and running, or do we try to ensure that our families are whole and well? Food for thought. So we will now move back to our moderator, Ms. Julie.
Karen, before you transition.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, that question you asked is a very important one. One, because it assumes that, most education policies are built around, normal systems, normal situations. And this policies, especially when you look at, education, they are mostly built around, functioning schools, stable financing, predictable calendars, normal attendance, everything. So when a crisis happens, an event takes place, sometimes this crisis expose whether those policies are flexible enough and they can withstand the needs of the children or not. And I think that's something that we need to really go back into, especially when we probe the question around whether the policies are fit and whether the policies are flexible enough. And I think a good education policy should look at the fragility, should look at the context and ask ourselves, what do we do when children lose their routine? What do we do when we find a crisis that exposes children to traumatic situations? When crisis exposes children to increased risk of abuse? What do we do when children are exposed to psychosocial trauma experiences? And I think that is a very important question that we need to dwell on a little bit, not in detail, but to ask ourselves whether we can begin to ask ourselves if the policies that we have are fit for purpose, are they flexible enough? Because education cannot wait just because there's a crisis. But then how do we make sure that policy takes into consideration the fact that, of course, education cannot wait, but then what else do we need to do? So my experience as an education and emergency practitioner is also the fact that we need to quickly figure out how do we create temporary learning spaces. How do we work with the structures that are available at community level to strengthen and improve the speed at which we can return children to formal or any form of learning? And that's something that I think that in Jamaica, given experiences that we have gone through, we need to revisit.
Okay. Thank you for that. Dr. Wilmot, I give you 30 seconds before I go over to our moderator. Go ahead, Dr. Wilmot. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon to the panelists and to all. The panelists are making some interesting points regarding preparation for and what needs to be done. But one of the realities that we face as it relates to our policy planning is that we have strong policies, but these policies have failed at the point of implementation. And UNESCO International Institute of Ed Planning released a report recently that spoke to adaptive implementation. I was doing this around my own work on school crisis planning, and they spoke to the fact that these policies, they're not really anticipatory early, and so that sometimes the policies are entrenched in realities that are distant from what we experience in terms of the available resources, how feasible it is, the type of leadership that we need, and of course also the political legitimacy for the implementation to work and to be effective. There also needs to be a kind of system where there is real-time feedback and that there are evaluations that are taking place even while the implementation unfolds. And one of the things that stood out too, I think one of the panelists mentioned it, is that at the lower level, actors are not necessarily empowered to make certain types of decisions, and so the the capacities that are needed to support the school and to push the continuous learning and to cohere stakeholder participation there, and also that the context is not adaptive, and that meaning that the coherence with how plans are implemented and what are written in them, there's no alignment with the local realities and also within the governance structure. And so as we advance this discussion, I would like us to reflect on, or just to answer, how adaptive is the implementation of our policies?
Excellent point. Excellent point. So we will now move on to the next segment, and we ask our moderator, Ms. Julia Edwards, to take the microphone. Go ahead, Ms. Edwards.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Reed Clark. Ladies and gentlemen, we have gotten some excellent feedback there from our participants. We have gotten some great perspective from our panelists. And so some key takeaways from that discourse. Across the region, crisis response tends to be more reactive rather than embedded in standing policy. We heard the point being brought out as well that bureaucratic processes are often cited as barriers to rapid decision-making in crises. And certainly, within the diaspora, CARICOM and multilateral partners all have roles to play in how we prepare, how we navigate in the aftermath. And so we can agree that we will need to further explore how these relationships should be codified in terms of national policy ahead of the next crisis. And it means the planning always starts now. It is not something that can be deferred. In fact, if you're like me and you tend to watch the calendar, I'm always mindful, okay, spring is here, and the next thing, just before we talk about summer, we're talking about hurricane season, right? Because we know our hurricane season here in Jamaica, June 1 to November 30th. And it is a given, it is there. We know it is on the calendar every year, the date doesn't change. And so we have some things that we can do. We heard the perspectives primarily of two of our primary school principals talking about the systems they have in place at their schools, how it is that they prepare for disasters, right? And it is always good to have some plan in place because there may be things happening beyond that plan, but at least some things you can manage. And interestingly, how the students responded when those systems were tested in real life. For our panelists, though, having gone through this dialogue so far, we know that crisis interrupts the curriculum calendar in ways that are rarely planned for, and beyond catching up, we know we have to think about what is essential knowledge, what can be deferred, or what can be permanently removed from the curriculum. Additionally, we know that the curriculum is not just a standalone, it is one component of how education actually happens, because our students are largely in brick and mortar buildings, right? They're in the physical space. And so to our panelists, if you were advising the Minister of Education today on structural reform that would make Jamaica materially more crisis resilient, let's say within 18 to 24 months, what would you recommend? I'll take Dr. Gilling first.
My suggestion is that Jamaica has enough data. Jamaica has enough policies in place. We need terribly updated policies so that it reflects our lived experiences, and so that we don't we don't go into a crisis without having the best opportunity to resist. So therefore, if we couldn't resist, it's because of a Category 5 hurricane that we've never seen in all of our days. We've had experiences with Category 4 and Category 3 and Category 2 and Category 1, but we never had a 5. And so what are our policies about curriculum development, curriculum upgrades look like? Is it ready as of today? Is it ready because we've spent time reviewing, looking at, and implementing the things that of our lived experience, so that any kind of situation comes, any kind of crisis comes for us to face, we at least have a fighting chance to get out of it. I think that's what my added is.
Thank you so much. I'll take Mr. Otieno, followed by Professor Mohamed Martin.
Thank you, Julia. We need to build an education continuity policy, and that education continuity policy must take into consideration the kind of challenges and the fragilities that we face on a daily basis or seasonally. I think Jamaica Education Ministry is aware of those fragilities and the challenges. We do not need to wait for the response or an emergency to happen. But we need to understand, as one of my colleagues said earlier on, what lessons are we learning or what lessons are we not learning? 2, we need to diversify our learning channels. We need to recognize that disasters will happen. Learning channels will need to be evolving, and there may not be one channel because of the lessons that we've learned. COVID taught us many things, and I think we need to go back there even and ask ourselves, invest in protecting teachers as frontline responders. Teachers come from the communities. And how can we work with the teachers in the communities from where they come from to strengthen their capabilities and abilities to continue with the teaching or lessons despite the disruptions? We need to think about prepositioning. Things will continue to happen. Are we prepositioning materials for learning to continue? Is the policy supporting initiatives such as school in a box materials? Is the policy supporting girl child and their needs, especially on sanitary hygiene when the crisis kicks in? Let's think about how we can begin to invest in strengthening school infrastructure to withstand the challenges that we know. And if it is about construction, if it is about mitigation, then we need to start putting that in place. We need to think preparedness, and this preparedness need to take into consideration that the children also need to be trained based on the risks that they go through every season. Finally, I will encourage that the education system in Jamaica embraces anticipatory action so that we can build schools, communities, and learners that can not be shocked when disaster happens. Someone said that we must learn lessons. Of course, I repeat that. But then we need to make sure that we invest in anticipatory action. That will be a very important step. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. Martin?
That's a
Professor
brilliant,
Martin?
thank you. That's a brilliant and very comprehensive response, which I don't know how much I can add to, but I want to say that part of, I cannot prescribe for Jamaica, so I'm not going to try. I think looking at what happened, that they would have responded very quickly from what I see online, right? But I'm thinking at the policy level, we have STVET, for instance, which is the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Response. And I'm wondering if there is an education response or an education continuity response at the level of that high level, because in the final analysis they kind of coordinate, they sit outside countries that coordinate for countries, and this is something that I think could be very helpful to all countries facing all kinds of disruptions, because there will be disruptions, and we are continuously speaking about, the one that is most recent and most devastating, but we have not touched yet on economic and socio-political disruptions, things that have to do with, real security breakdown and those kinds of things that really threaten our communities and countries. The second thing I'd like to add to what Otieno said just now, is that we have to kind of strengthen the community response a little bit, and to have community maps, so resilience maps, community disaster maps, risk maps, threat maps, because communities, even though at the very high level we prescribe policy, and I do agree that we have to find ways of making those policies more the future-proof them. And I've said already what I believe that we should have. You have a lighthouse that is a beacon, but on the lighthouse you also have a lookout, so they could see way out into sea what's coming. Is a tsunami coming? Is somebody sinking? We really need to invest resources in making sure we have that lookout capacity, that foresighting capacity, so that we can use the data that we have not only in single countries, but as a region. And the last thing, this might be slightly controversial, but I don't mind, because nobody asked me to come and say what everybody else is saying. You can Google that. But, in our country, we have a campus. I'm not speaking about schools. I'm a university professor, right? And I run a university. But we have a campus that is an indigenous campus, meaning our indigenous peoples, it serves that campus. And one of the things that we have realized very early is that we have to restructure our curriculum in terms of the sequencing and scheduling of our delivery to kind of match what their cultural norms are, because they go off for several months doing fishing, catching this or that. And if you were trying to put them in school at the same time as everybody else, they're just not going to be there. So if you know, for instance, and you can predict, and I'm not sure that that level of predictability is stable given climate change, but let's just say that it is. If you know that these certain months are going to be likely to be the months where you are going to face certain kinds of disruptions, even if you are resilient and your infrastructure is fine and your policies are fine, then maybe we should start looking at how we structure the curriculum, not only in terms of its scheduling, but in terms of what we deliver in times when we believe we will be safer. So that's a big question. It might be disruptive in its own sense in terms of how education systems in the region works with CXC and all of that. But it might be something to think about, not only in terms of Jamaica, but at a regional level going forward. There's much more I could say, but others have to speak. I just want to say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here. And Jamaica, you are wonderful, right? I love you. We love you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mohamed Martin. I will take Dr. Steve Lawrence, followed by Mr. Davion Leslie, and then we will segue to the next phase of our conversation as we draw to a close.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Mohamed, for what you just shared. And it was interesting that you shared about what happens with your indigenous institution, because in one of my service areas was Upper Manitoba, on indigenous land with indigenous people of Canada. And what happens there, you have times when the temperature will fall below -50. And that's a complete different curriculum that actually gets instantiated. Then you have what is called land-based learning, where they go out and that you no longer are in the classroom or in the computer lab. You're now going out, you're learning ice fishing, you are learning hunting caribou, you're learning survival. And it might be that we need to come up with a national education resilience framework that has us looking at not only national learning continuity standards, but just emergency protocols in terms of instruction and assessment. When paper-based won't work anymore, what do we have? Is it a time when we go back to the ISPs and said, during a disaster, every education institution, website, or learning management system can be accessed free from any device? Is the case where the television stations and the radio stations have content that is already prepared, that is not spread out across all disciplines, but the core disciplines to keep people, students engaged across? Because if you notice, early childhood have it locked, a child can jump on a tablet and get into Sesame Street and all of that and remain in touch and attached to learning. It is as you climb the ladder of education that you realize that there's no preparedness for continuity or continuous response in terms of disaster and in educational governance. So it is instructive that we really look at what has worked in other jurisdictions and kind of figure out where do we go nationally as we deal with the whole bit of not just the instructional and assessment response, but even what the psychosocial support systems look like during the crisis. People are still in Westmoreland, in Black River, going through it. What does that look like when Kingston is back to normal? So these are some of the conversations that really need to happen as we agitate and figure out as a national educational response, what should that look like? Thank you all for this amazing discussion.
Thank you so much, Doris, for your contribution, which is much appreciated. Mr. Leslie?
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia. And I too want to echo the words of appreciation that have been shared by my colleagues. You're going to have to forgive me. I am at my desk in the office, and it's the end of the workday here, and my background has got very busy. And so I would prefer not to turn my camera on at this moment. So forgive me. I think that my co-panelist, Otieno, really gave a pretty impressive list of some of the important issues that we will have to address if we're going to make Jamaica resilient, which I think is the word that you had used, and the structural changes that are required. There are perhaps 2 or 3 things I very quickly want to flag, and I'll go very quickly in the interest of time. I think we have said it before, but it bears repeating, and there has to be an emphasis on how we decentralize critical systems to facilitate rapid decision making, and how we build flexibility into and agility into the systems we have. How do we move away from highly centralized systems that become vulnerable during disruptions? And how do we empower authorities closer to the ground, from the level of the classroom to the level of school, all the way up to, in Jamaica, we have regions and so on. But how do we empower decision makers at each level to be able to make important decisions when crisis or when disruptions occur? I think too that one of the points that we sometimes do not acknowledge enough is that quality education that works even when we do not have a crisis prepares students for times of crisis. So if we have an education system built around the principles of quality instruction, where the teacher in the classroom is actively working to make himself or herself redundant, the students are able to work independently, solving problems on their own, working in small groups, charting their path forward, tracking their own progress. And the students, the system automates that. The system makes that routine. The system normalizes that. When students are forced to go online, for example, because we have had a disruption, that's not a new thing for them. It's not novel. Their self-regulatory skills have already been promoted. If we have a system that is actively discouraging memorization and promoting critical thinking and helping students to develop volitional strategies that they can deploy, that they can experiment, then when we have crisis and they have to work from their homes, they are not as helpless as many of them were during COVID. When we empower parents to be a part of that conversation too, during normal times of operation, we prepare them as well to be partners in learning when invariably we have crisis. So I think it's important that we have an education system that recognizes the value of quality instruction and how that prepares learners and the system itself when we have crisis. The last point I'd perhaps want to make is that I don't think the policy challenge that is in front of us is to choose between technology and tradition. And I find that sometimes that's how we present it. And I perhaps acknowledge that that is sometimes even my own framing. And I'm not trying to suggest that is the choice we have. I think that the most resilient systems are those where these elements are layered on top of each other, where we have our traditions, but we are not necessarily beginning with technology being this solution. We are starting a conversation, accepting that cultural intelligence tells us that what might work in our reality might not be what we are adopting from elsewhere. The most resilient education systems are not the most technologically advanced necessarily. They are the ones that are most adaptable, the most inclusive, and the most capable of continuing learning under any condition. That's what we should be aiming for. Now, whatever that looks like in any dispensation and in any jurisdiction is what we should applaud and go towards. But I do not believe that we should lock ourselves into solutions that may not be able to be applied universally. Cultural intelligence and contextual relevance would be essential when we are responding to crisis.
I would like to say something, because I think I missed your question because I was going in and out, and I answered a question based on a previous question. And I'd like an opportunity to answer the question that you asked regarding, what would you say to the ministry? Because I just got a text saying that I answered the wrong question, right? All right, and so, and if you allow me a couple of minutes, because I am a criminologist, and
we're over time, Dr. Gilling. So if you could do it in 2 minutes, I would appreciate it.
I will. One of the things that we have not spent a lot of time in is the crisis of crime in our schools, right? And we are dealing with it at a high school level. I believe that the state needs to take 100% responsibility of early childhood at age 3 and 4 and 5, and employ calm and restorative practices and de-escalation, having our teachers understanding what their triggers are, and they're doing a wonderful job, teachers are, but we need to teach them how to understand how to identify triggers and how to identify triggers in themselves so that they can help their students, triggers in parents. Education is a three-way thing. Students, teachers, parents. We need to get our parents back into the fold of education so that when they get to age 15 and 16, that they would have learned how to understand their own selves and their own emotions.
Thank you so much, Doc. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm seeing in the Zoom chat, normalizing, just agreeing with Dr. Killen and others before him, normalizing self-directed learning building adaptable learning for any disaster context. Our conversations have been on policy and governance responses, curriculum adaptation. We have been hearing about infrastructure challenges, psychosocial support, innovation, and future readiness. We facilitated this webinar via the Zoom platform. We have a number of participants on the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information Facebook page, as well as YouTube. And so at this time, I'm going to invite Ms. Marcia Higgins, one of my co-moderators, to just share some of the feedback she has been seeing on those social media pages.
Thank you, Moderator Julia Edwards, because we completely understand that we could not complete this exercise without allowing our participants to ask a couple of questions of their own or to make their comments, give their feedback on the discussion so far under the theme, Navigating Crises with Creativity and Resilience in Education. We have on the Zoom platform a number of our principals of both primary and high schools. And so we invite at this time any of those principals. Some of our high schools, for instance, were used after Hurricane Melissa as shelters. Those came with their own issues, their own complications, which the principals had to navigate. So I invite at this time any of the principals online. Here are the high school principals. I know that a couple of our primary school principals have already shared. We invite the high school principals at this time. If you want to go ahead and raise your hand or drop your feedback in the chat, you have the opportunity to do so now. Principal Powell of the Infield High School had expressed an interest earlier in sharing a perspective. Principal Powell, are you ready to do so at this time? You may go ahead. I'm also seeing Principal Ware on the chat. Principal Corral. We are not seeing any questions at this. We're not seeing any questions at this time on the YouTube channel. I'm seeing, I believe this is still coming from Dr. Steve Lawrence in the chat. At the end of the day, since the future crisis will always come, we have a fiduciary responsibility and a duty to our respective nations to help drive the narrative and thought leadership that translates in a national educational resilience framework. We focus on number one, national learning continuity standards, emergency instructional protocol, digital education contingency plans, disaster response educational governance, national education communication procedures, and finally, going forward, the prescriptive inclusion of psychosocial support systems. We thank you for that, Dr. Lawrence. I'm seeing a raised hand from Mr. Leslie. Was that a new raised hand, Mr. Leslie, or?
It's new. I don't know if you can entertain it.
Yes, certainly.
Right. I'm going to be very quick again. And I would have done my brief significant injustice if I did not, as a CARICOM rep, make one point. And I raised my hand actually when Prof. Martin provided the opened the door that would have allowed me to make the point, but then I forgot. And it is with respect to the coordination at the regional level for policy advancement to strengthen disaster risk reduction. And the role that CDEMA plays, CDEMA being one of our many CARICOM institutions, one of our community institutions, and regardless of how one might feel about community institutions, generally speaking, CDEMA does excellent work and has a marvelous track record within the region. There is indeed accuracy in what Prof. Martin said, that we absolutely need to begin considering how we coordinate at a regional level the disaster risk reduction strategies that we need. And I'm framing it like that because the conversation that CDEMA has been leading, and I would recommend to the JAEO, if this conversation were to have a part 2, that you consider including a rep from CDEMA in this conversation, because they are very interested in having conversations around disaster risk reduction, policy planning for education, and how we can shift the narrative from disaster response, which primarily is how we talk about disasters within the region, and usually framed within the context of climatic disasters and not the multiple other kinds of risk that we are exposed to, including industrial action. And that too is a threat that education systems have to consider. So there is an opportunity for that conversation to be had, and I just wanted to assure the meeting that that is a conversation that has started. How do we ensure that we develop a coherent, harmonized, but contextually relevant and adaptable policy that would help shift the region from disaster response to disaster risk reduction, and that would ensure that education systems have continuity plans in case of disruptions and emergencies.
Thank you so much for that additional input, Mr. Leslie. And our panelists are really giving us feedback all the way to the wire. I'm seeing Dr. Otieno putting in the chat, children cannot pause their future because adults are too slow to prepare and adapt. Policy must be flexible to drive learning under pressure. Creativity in educational policy is needed and must be practical to sustain learning under pressure. Resilience must also be strong to absorb pressure and shocks. And we must adopt anticipatory action before pressure creates a catastrophe. And there is a question: are we building education systems that are only responding, or are we building education systems that protect learning? And so we thank the panelists for those perspectives coming at the end. A lot of food for thought. We are not seeing any additional questions. I see Dr. Steve. Is that a new perspective you want to share? We have time for one more.
Ms. Higgins?
Yes.
We will unfortunately have to cut there because we have a hard stop at 4:30. And we are just minutes away from there.
One last comment that I think we can take in 30 seconds. A good last word, I believe, moderator. For policies to be resilient, they have to be implementable. Who are the individuals responsible for bridging the policy between macro and micro levels of the system? Do they have the required capacities, the autonomy and resources to make contextual decisions? And finally, what are some needs identified and plans to address them? That last comment from Dr. Anne-Marie Wilmot, I believe, is a fitting way to end this segment. I throw back to you, moderator Julia Edwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Higgins. Thank you so much for your contributions, colleagues. Thank you, moderators. Certainly will agree with me that this has been a quite engaging session. The time was just not sufficient to dive into all that we really want to cover because this is such a huge topic. But of course, we know that the collaboration will continue, the dialogue will continue as we seek to strengthen our systems. One of the strengths, I would say, that we have as educators, as STVET practitioners, as professionals, as people, is that of learning, unlearning, strategizing, embed and create, using our creativity to find meaningful solutions. We know that crisis has historically been a forcing function for innovation in education, but those innovations rarely survive the return to stability. And so, as we are considering our next steps, we know that students currently and those who will come, those who will entering the school system come this new school year, they're going to continue to face climate, economic, and technological disruptions that we cannot fully predict. We're already seeing what is happening coming out of the war currently underway. Well, there's a ceasefire, but sometimes, some days you wonder, is it or is it not, right? The Iran, US, and Israel war. And of course, we are learning about new places. Even though we would have learned geography in school, there are some things that we didn't know about how the economics of the world works and where a lot of our supplies come from, right? And so we're going to continue to face those disruptions. What dispositions, what competencies and habits of mind should we be deliberately cultivating, or are our current systems capable of delivering them? Certainly, this conversation has shown us that we are not where we need to be. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to thank you for the time that you have shared with us this afternoon. Mr. Otieno Killen, Dr. Leo Gilling, Professor Paloma Mohamed Martin, Mr. Davion Leslie, Dr. Steve Lawrence, President and executive members of the Jamaica Association of Education Officers, the organizing team of this webinar from the Research and Evaluation Committee of the JAEO, webinar participants, our technical team from the Jamaica Information Service, or Media Services Unit in the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information, the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information for partnering with us and enabling us to use their YouTube and Facebook platform to facilitate this session. To my co-moderators, Mrs. Karine Reed-Clark and Ms. Marcia Higgins, thank you so much for this engaging, futuristic dialogue, and I look forward to many more similar conversations as together we seek to move the needle forward to ensure that we are not caught flat-footed when the next crisis hit. We should continue to learn and grow from them. There are some things we are already doing right. We have a modified curriculum. We have an education in emergencies plan. We have a number of tools in our toolbox. And of course, we have a resilient, creative set of people to keep the world churning, to keep education going, to keep livelihoods intact. But certainly, we know that we have a ways to go, and it is our collective engagement that will take us there. Thank you, and ever blessing.
Thank you and take care, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Good evening, everyone.